The cadets are settling in on board the Tiger's Claw, with Blair recording a message for his parents, and Maniac and Archer playing anti-gravity squash or something like that. All seems nice and homely in these opening few minutes. Believe me, that won't last. The cadets are summoned to the briefing room by Commodore Tolwyn, and Blair and Maniac wind up racing each other there, which in turn introduces us to the Tiger's Claw's chief technician, Maya McGeadens, when Maverick runs straight into her. She is a likeable character, but she doesn't play much of a part in this episode, so I'm not going to say too much more about her just now. What we do see, though, is that Blair is immediately smitten with her. Look at him, and hear the sudden quiver in his youthful voice.
Wow. Thanks again.
Anyway, when they arrive at the briefing room, Tolwyn assigns the cadets some very basic reconnaissance work in a relatively unimportant system. It should all be routine and uneventful. Yeah. Maniac notices something interesting. The system was originally surveyed by one Damon Carnes, a one-time ace Confederation pilot who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Well, anyway, Maniac and Maverick are going about their business when suddenly they come across a Kilrathi transport ship, which looks exactly like a carrier, but never mind that now. Maniac, true to his character, wants to fly in and blast it to tiny pieces. Maverick, true to his character, wants to adhere to regulations and covertly follow the transport, hopefully finding the location of other, larger Kilrathi ships that the Claw can launch a proper strike against later. Since he is wing leader, that's what they do. A new wave of fighters approach the transport, and soon it comes under attack by both human and Kilrathi fighters, as do Maverick and Maniac. Maniac's ship is soon disabled, and he tells Maverick to pull back to the Claw whilst he covers his retreat as best he can in his crippled fighter. This noble deed is ultimately for naught, however, as Blair tries to sally to his rescue, evidently failing to hit a ship that's sitting perfectly still and getting his own fighter disabled for his trouble. I mentioned in the Red and Blue review that when the situation is serious enough, Blair and Marshall's rivalry fades into insignificance, and once again we see that here in what is perhaps its clearest example in the show. Maniac, expecting to be dead any minute, is willing to fight to the last second to give Blair a chance to escape, and Blair in turn risks his life in an attempt to save Marshall. Sadly, it's all for nothing, and a sinister voice is soon announcing,
"Surrender immediately, or be destroyed."
The two are taken in chains to a pirate base built into an inhospitable-looking rocky moon, which has been christened Tortuga by the locals. This woman, who has an atrocious taste in tattoos, blusters for a moment before pointing out the Pirate King himself.
What? Can't be. What's wrong, Maniac? It's Damon Carnes.
Maniac is understandably shocked by this revelation, as Carnes was his childhood hero. It was him who inspired him not only to become a pilot, but was the motivation for his endless mission to be the best. He comments on the holovid featuring Carnes, namely The Last Hero, which he'd seen when he was a child, which undoubtedly presented his character in a rather more idealistic light.
That vid was made by the Confederation to persuade gullible children to become pilots. Apparently it worked.
Seeing the man himself, it is very hard to imagine that he was ever once a Confed hero. He seems bored and detached from everything, and confesses that he abandoned the war and the Confederation simply because one day he realised he couldn't care less about either. He flew off and eventually found other drifting recidivists and made his pirate kingdom in the middle of nowhere. His motivation in bringing Maniac and Maverick home for dinner is also simply because he was bored. Maniac can't quite stop himself idealising his childhood hero, even as he and Blair are locked away in a cell, and a fistfight even breaks out when Maverick insults Carnes. Carnes himself then walks in and announces they're going to attack another transport. Maniac asks to join him, giving no greater reason than that he wants to fly on his idol's wing, and claiming that he doesn't care whether the transport belongs to the Confederation or the Kilrathi. So they fly off, the apparently traitorous Maverick flying an Epi, which canonistically was considered a flimsy, fragile wreck even by the standards of light fighters. The attack begins on what is revealed to be a Kilrathi transport. Lord only knows why they use a proper transport model in this scene and a carrier model in the other, but never mind. Maniac makes one pass, not firing once, then runs off back towards Tortuga. Joining Carnes was a ruse, and now he's trying to contact the Tiger's Claw and head back to extract Maverick. Unfortunately, Carnes gives chase and attacks. Maniac has apparently gone from hero worship to anger at Carnes' betrayal, and at one point makes an earnest attempt to kill him. Sadly, his weapons and communications don't work. Carnes wasn't exactly about to take this green, puffy-faced Confed cadet under his shadowy wing without reservations, apparently. Once again, Maniac's ship gets disabled, and he's literally a second away from being shot down when Carnes' second-in-command helpfully chimes in. Bit of a problem, apparently. The transport was bait planted by the Kilrathi to draw out the pirates, and a sizable force of fighters are wiping them out. Even more soon converging on Tortuga. Oh dear, what a thing to happen. We are treated to a minimalist, though surprisingly chilling Kilrathi attack on the pirate base. Maverick hides his Confed uniform and poses as another pirate as a Kilrathi barges into his cell and drags him before Prince Strakath, who is triumphantly standing in the wreckage in this proud moment of victory. Although we see him in the previous episode, this scene really serves as a better introduction for him.
Vermin. I am Thrakath Nar Kiranka, Prince of Kilra, the Fang of Seagar, Destroyer of Worlds!
The titular Last One Left turns out to be Maverick, left behind to spread the warning of what happens to jumped-up recidivists who attack Kilrathi ships. To that end, he's abandoned on a deserted, lifeless moon with seemingly minimal chances of escape. Rather defeats the purpose if you ask me, but oh well. Maniac returns, rather ungracefully. The two get their respective junkers operational, and they return to the Tiger's Claw. During the debriefing, Commodore Torin reveals that Damon Carnes' criminal exploits were not only already known by the Confederation, but were covered up to preserve his heroic legend and avoid any risk to public morale. He forbids Maniac and Maverick from ever discussing this matter with anyone else, and sends them out the door.
People need heroes.
And the Confederation needs propaganda to persuade more gullible children to become pilots. After watching the episode, it's easy, I think, to have your first impression of Carnes be as a vaguely tragic figure, a one-time innocent driven over the edge by the war. His cowboy-esque demeanour carries with it hints of the anti-hero, and it's even arguable that he gains a sliver of redemption in his last doomed charge against the Kilrathi, fighting to his last for the sake of his world, such as it is. Personally, I think he's a broken husk of a man and a straightforward reprobate. Look closer at his face, with its unhealthy pallid look and unkempt stubble, and notice how no matter what happens, his voice never seems to rise above a near whisper.
You think you know, but people change. They have to. War isn't a game for children.
He seems almost ghost-like. One way you can look at this is that he's reverted to this state to block out the horrors and hardships he experienced during his war years, leaving only an apathetic shell. However, Carnes was a legend at one time, and you don't get to be a legend without considerable success and valour, suggesting that he is neither a coward nor is he in any way a stranger to combat, so it's hard to imagine fear dragging him down. He certainly keeps his cool when the shooting starts in the episode. Consider, then, this scene from Wing Commander 4 for a moment.
You know, to a captain, isolation is a constant enemy. You have your wingmen and the brotherhood of your fellow pilots, but a captain... I have no doubt Eisen let himself get too isolated. Perhaps it contributed to his treacherous actions.
Now obviously, Carnes was a pilot, not a ship's captain. He was, however, the best pilot. Top of the killboard, maybe top graduate in his academy class as well, and the one pilot in thousands made to star in an inspirational holovid. With that in mind, it's quite possible that his fellow pilots resented him. Or even if they didn't, perhaps his experiences of war and duty wound up simply being too different from those of his peers for him to truly empathise with or befriend any of them. With that in mind, consider this scene.
I'm not like you!
I know. I was like your friend, Maverick.
Young, honourable, by-the-book, idealistic Maverick. It's difficult to imagine that this pirate swine was once anything like unto him, and the idea that Maverick, or Maniac, or Archer, or any of the young cadets fighting for their species could degenerate to such an extent is really rather horrific. That said, one of the recurring themes throughout the show, and perhaps one of the foremost facts of war for that matter, is the loss of innocence, and it's easy to see how much of a contributing factor that might have played to Carnes' fall from grace. Imagine young cadet Damon Carnes undergoing the same training in the field that Maverick is going through. He sees wingman after wingman be put to the torch, sees Confederation ships blown apart in scores, sees Kilrathi die by his hand time after time, and sees entire colonies extinguished. In no time at all, any thoughts of a noble struggle against a ruthless enemy for the sake of his species are replaced by the harsh reality and the struggle to survive. Maybe whilst everyone else around him finds comfort in their friends, he can't manage the same and falls deeper into a pit of isolation. Then there's the last hero. The Terran Confederation, the good guys, his side, the people he has sworn to fight and die for, want him to play the lead role in something which lies to small children, telling them of the glory and honour that awaits them in the cockpit of a fighter. That's not likely to endear him to Confed. Whatever the case, though, by Carnes' own admission, his desertion was not a moral stand of any kind. He didn't revile or object to the war. He simply realised one day that he didn't care about it, so off he buggered, and then he started up a pirate base. Why did he do this instead of just resigning? Well, on the one hand, it's unlikely that Confed would have just let their wunderkind walk out the door, and on the other hand, well, consider this scene.
There are two kinds in the galaxy. Only two. Those who fly in order to get somewhere, and those who love to fly.
The impression I get from this is that Carnes, for all his indifference to the war, still derives some kind of joy from being a pilot. Or perhaps it's just all he knows, or all he has left. It's possible then that he set up his pirate base as a strange kind of side business to provide the fuel, munitions, and whatever else would be necessary to keep him flying. Being a pirate, robbing from the rich to give to yourself, suggests a considerable degree of selfishness on its own. But Khan's abandoned his duty, his career, his comrades, his family, if he had any, and his homeworld. Then he carved out his own little kingdom in this backwater system of his, and smiling his ghastly smile, he revels in the gloomy opulence and adoration of his people as best he still can, whilst flying on his own terms and, with his fighter, imposing his will upon anyone nearby. Whatever drove him to this life, his actions are hard to excuse. Then of course comes his ignoble end. As he flies off to certain death, he tells Maniac, "Every soldier must fight his last battle," a rather spurious claim, considering he's not a soldier anymore. It's debatable that he could have flown far away to another system and tried his luck at the pirating trade again, but instead, with no hesitation, he flies headlong into a massive Kilrathi force, muttering disinterestedly, "The whole universe to fight." Maybe thinking that it would be cool to fight against unwinnable odds, or, just maybe, relieved that at long last his wretched half-life is over. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day till the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays of lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his arrow upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Oh well. Moving on to our two protagonists, in this episode we are once again shown the differing mentalities of Maverick and Maniac, the former being very much by the book, the latter being gung-ho and eager to shoot any Kilrathi ship that comes into view. Thus far in the series, Maverick appears to have been presented as the better man, a competent and sensible leader, a good pilot and a generally likeable person, whereas Maniac, whilst also being a good pilot and decent enough person, comes across as someone who really should be kept on the leash for his own good. This gets turned very much on its head in this episode, however. Consider that 1 minute Maniac is defending Khan's honour whilst in a cell with Maverick, then in the very next minute, when Khan announces that they're off to go play pirate, he immediately puts an escape plan into motion. In the face of his hero's open betrayal of his own values, Maniac doesn't cling to any hope that things might not be as they seem. Khan's is now the enemy and he has to escape, so he quickly formulates a plan and gets to work. Admittedly, a 20-minute long children's cartoon doesn't afford much time for lengthy moments of soul-searching in its characters, but even so, it's an impressive display of initiative, creativity, and adherence to his own principles from Maniac. Conversely, Maverick wears his honour on his sleeve and as a result stays locked in his cell until the Kilrathi come and let him out. To his credit, by posing as one of the pirates, he does stop any critical information, such as the location of the Tiger's Claw, being tortured out of him. But if he had gone along with Maniac's plan, then the two of them could have made a break back for the Claw together and made escape a good deal easier. In theory, at least. In practice, of course, it wasn't quite that simple. Ultimately, it's only through luck that either of them survive at all. If Khan had received a distress call from his lieutenant literally a second later, then Maniac would have been incinerated. And if Maverick hadn't been lucky enough to be the last one left, then odds are he would have been killed as well. It's not directly shown in the episode, but this is an interesting display of how luck, or lack thereof, can be the ultimate deciding factor in whether or not someone survives in the war. Another interesting feature of this episode is that the Confederation, the good guys, are apparently still using the legend of Damon Khan's to swell the ranks of recruits, even knowing that he had become a pirate, and presumably they continue to do so after his death, careless all the while of the fact that most of the cadets who Khan inspires will end up dead. All this might be understandable considering that the war still needs to be fought and the alternative is Kilrathi enslavement, or worse. However, it's certainly a moral grey area, with the military effectively lying to the civilian population. On the other hand, we have the Kilrathi, the bad guys, taking an active and decisive stand against interstellar piracy. Now granted, this is probably more a case of power projection than it was to protect shipping routes. Indeed, one interesting facet of Kilrathi mentality that shows up mostly in the novels is that they view transports with disdain, and crew them only with the dregs of society, who aren't considered worthy of serving aboard proper warships. This mentality actually came rather close to losing them the war in later years. Nevertheless, the menace of Damon Khan's and the terror he brought to innocent merchants has been brought to an end by Prince Thrakath of all people. As we've seen, there are no simplistic good guys and bad guys in Wing Commander Academy, and I must admit it is rather satisfying to see the alien enemy descend upon the pirate moon and wipe out the, mostly, human recidivists. All in all, quite a depressing episode. But don't worry, the next one on the list, the most delicate instrument, is even more depressing.